Hey guys, I'm FatBuddyCat, and this is my custom vintage mini bike. Today, I'm going to figure out the jackshaft assembly, and I'm going to set a chain to make sure this is going to work. Oh boy. It's going to be close. All right, first thing I got to do is flip this thing over. Okay, well, maybe I lied. Not a great way to start things out. First things first, this chain is too long and we're pulled all the way back to the furthest position in the adjusters. That's going to get shortened, and ideally I want to be up in the middle somewhere when this thing is finally set up. As of right now, we're clearing everything. When you put tension on the chain, it lifts, okay? And I'm up over my pivot. When you sit down on the bike, I mean, as soon as you sit on the bike and apply any weight, the arm goes this way. That brings the chain with the sprocket. So the more you push down, the further this goes away from this shaft. What I'm looking out for is where this frame returns up under the chassis right here. We don't want to get so much lift that we make contact there. I installed this plate, which is fully welded around and supporting both frame members. This is also welded to the side of the chassis. If needed be, I'm going to cut a section of this pipe out, or tubing, and grind it somewhat flat, and I'll end up taking a piece of angle iron, alright, and welding that in instead, just so that I can hit two sides. But that's that. If I don't have to do that, I'm not going to do that. Another thing to consider is the sprocket size. This is a 54. I also have a 60. That also changes where the chain falls. Up front, I think I have a 10 tooth on it right now. Probably don't want to go any smaller. We definitely don't. The only other issue that I can see from up above is that when my chain is straight, we come awfully close to this collar. This collar is skinnier than the split collar, so if I wanted to move that, I would have to figure out a way to make it tighter this way or move it this way and have some kind of a smaller spacer that pushes up against my bushing on the inside. We might clear it. I think we're going to get this thing set up, get the chain to where it needs to be, and then we'll sit on it and roll it around and see what happens. Now we can turn the bike upside down. This is what we're after. Here's the concept, guys. We're going torque converter. In order to alleviate the issues that I'm having with the disc in the back for now, I'm going to try to fit a band brake onto my jack shaft. Later on, I'm going to try to put a front disc brake on with one of those hubs. I have a 5/8 bore mini hub, 4-inch brake drum, a 4-inch band, a standard 30 series pulley, some various washers, bushings, and spacers, as well as these split collars and some regular collars. I have a longer shaft, and this is some fresh key stock. I got all of these parts from my friends, Grey Goat Garage and ombwarehouse.com. Right here is my biggest concern. This collar coming in contact with the chain on the top. When this thing is sitting upright and you sit on the bike, it's like, it'll probably be something like that when it's sitting by itself. When you sit on the bike, it drops down to about there. And then the suspension moves this way and takes the chain with it away from the pivot. But not so much that this one comes down and interferes. Because when the bike also is right side up, this chain is like way up here. It's not even near it. It's kind of frustrating. The chain again won't be near any of this. If we go with a bigger sprocket, we do come closer to the chassis. Also frustrating. This is the side that the pulley is going to go on. The reason that we used this 5/8 bolt was so that it worked as a pin and it held as close to the chassis as possible, giving us the most room. Here's our pulley. When this thing goes on, we can really end up right about there. That's not too bad. We're going to need a longer shaft though. This is the mini hub. This is what the brake's going to attach to. We want to keep this as close to the bike as possible. Well, that could be a problem. I have this lock collar on here. Maybe I could switch that to a nut. Cut some of these threads off. Or I might just try to keep this on here, right? So that we're not impinging on the swing arm and everything's free moving. All right? That helps our bushings and stuff out. So in alleviating some of that stress, I think what I would like to do is leave enough threads to get a nylock nut backed up to the collar. And I think in doing that, with this offset in the brake, it might not be too bad. I'm trying to kind of mimic some balance with this thing. Well, I've already made a final decision on this situation. By this situation, I'm referring to the flange bearings. The way that this is set up right now, these collars hold the flange bearing in, and then it passes through the washer and the swing arm, and then on the other side of this washer there's a bushing that's flat up against the swing arm. So what I'm going to do is reverse the flange bearings and get rid of the bushings. Then what I'm going to do is only use one lock collar on this side. The reason I'm using that lock collar is it's just a backup. In case anything were to come off of this end here, the swing arm wouldn't just fall off. This pin would stay in place. There's the flange bearing the original way. I'm just working these flange bearings one at a time. I'm hitting them with a little bit of white lithium grease before I put them back in. That'll extend the lifetime of these things. Since I'm only going to be using one of these collars this time around, I'm kicking Pee-wee out of the game. I'm going to put in one of these split jobs. These things are a lot stronger. And here is the new way. This mini hub goes on either way. However, it barely kisses the bolt. I'm going to have to do something there. I think when I mount my hub, I want to use this to space it away. I think that's a good safe distance. Because remember, there's going to be a bolt on there. We're going to want some threads. If that comes into about, there. Okay, you can see we don't have a lot. So we're definitely not going to put it on that way. I'm going to mark this bolt and I'm going to cut it and set it up with just a nylock nut. I also nabbed the bushing that I had out here and moved it inside so that this collar goes right up against the inside of that flange bearing. I think we have plenty of cyborg meat on the flange itself for that big old bolt. That's not going to ming that thing up. It's really not moving that far at all. These shocks are only going to give us about 2 inches. We'll pick it up a little bit in the back, but this pivot really doesn't move that much. I just went ahead and cut the bolt. I left a little bit next to my line in case I want to add a washer or something. I also noticed that the flange bushings were rubbing a little bit on the ends of the bolt where they make contact. So I'm going to go ahead and polish that up on both ends. I took off the slightest bit of material and then I sanded down to 1200. It ain't sticking now. Since that's moving so freely now, I'm going to go ahead and put that shim back in there. That way, there's less resistance between the head of my bolt and my flange bearing. Okay, so here's where we're at now. I left just a few threads on there. I like that. And once we space this out, I think we'll be looking pretty good. We also got rid of this whole problem right here. The only other issue we could have would be the frame up under here. But so far, so good. With the back wheel and the chain still out of the situation, now I want to determine whether or not the shaft is going to be long enough to fit everything on there. I'm going to have the brake drum on this side and the pulley on this one. Ooh, that would be close. If the shaft was already at the end of the pulley, we're going to have to put a split collar on the end. I'm going to put one down there to be safe too. So this shaft is too short. I'll save it for something else and grab a longer one. All right. We know that's going to work. That's plenty long. Now, I'll just start putting my pulley and my mini hub on and try to figure out the space that I need away from the bearing in order to clear my pivot bolt. These are the cutoffs from the wheel spacers. One of them is actually pretty straight. It's also just thick enough that if I put it behind my mini hub, I'll get about an 1/8 inch off the end of my bolt. I'm pretty comfortable with that. I'm just going to take a file to this, clean it up a little bit. Oh, wait a minute. Why don't you get back in the game there, Pee-wee? This is perfect on both sides. Ever so slightly skinnier. Put it on there and take a look. Oh yeah. That'll do. I'm going to need a key for this mini hub, but the only other thing that's going to go on is a washer and our split collar. I'll figure out the pulley, and then I'm going to mark my jack shaft to cut it down to size. Over on the pulley side, I ended up using that leftover cut spacer. So, now I have a split collar, a washer, my pulley, a spacer, a shaft. I have the sprocket here. We're going to need collars to hold that in place. Over here, I used a collar for a spacer, the mini hub, a washer, and then my other split collar. I'm going to leave about a 1/2 inch of shaft sticking out on this side. Over here, I'll mark the same thing, and I'll go and cut this jack shaft. Well, I might as well put the wheel back on there. I'm going to have to figure out the alignment for the sprocket. It's probably going to end up being a couple washers or spacer on this side and a split collar on this side holding it in line. So let's figure that out now. I'm going to have to go to the hardware store in the morning. The spacer that's going to fit in there is just smaller than one of these collars. I'll bring this with me and find something real close. All I have left is some 5/8 washers. If I get some of the shims, that might help out too. That's going to be pretty close to where it's going to go. See, if I put this in, you stand back, I can already see the chain pitching in ever so slightly at the end. But where this has a swing arm, I want this to be as close as I can possibly get it. Unfortunately, it's going to be right about there. So close. Well, turns out they didn't have the size I needed at the hardware store. They did have some other nuts and bolts though. So I ended up having to cut my own off of one of those big 5-inch Duca spacers. I got it as close as I could with an angle grinder, and then on my bench I just used a file and got that sucker pretty much perfect. Reason being, there's no washers or anything, and this is going up against my sprocket. I want to give it every advantage I can to help it spin true. So, that said, my chain is super duper straight. It's easier to see when it has tension on it. Let me see if I can. There you go. Alright. I ran a plane off of the side of the chassis here, you know, because this is a parallel plane that, you know, carries the pivot and the jack shaft. So if these are parallel this way and these go through them this way and those holes are in the same place, then that's our best opportunity to find a straight line. We're going to rock with that. Now I'm going to have to bring my adjusters forward, middle to forward, and find where I can cut off a usable link. Okay, I have the chain very loose, and I'm set a little over halfway back on my tensioners. That's all I want for right now. We could go a link shorter, but we're not going to chance it yet. Part of the jack shaft setup is going to be making sure that this chain clears everything while it's rolling, while the suspension is compressed. As soon as you sit on this bike, the suspension moves and the chain goes with it. So I'll get everything tightened up on my jack shaft. I'll get probably use one of those peewee collars for a spacer, and then one of those big boy collars to hold peewee in space, and that'll hold everything right where it needs to be. I could put my mini hub on and also my pulley. Wait, no, mini hub pulley. Yeah. We'll see how this goes first. Alright. I have everything tight and in position. I went ahead and put all my keys in. So we're live and looking pretty smooth from the bottom side. However, I'm still going to have to sit on this thing to make sure it works. Oh boy. I'm going to clean up my mess and get this thing turned back over. as I'm tightening the back wheel, remember I mentioned that this is going to have torsion on it when it comes together. So I'm still freely moving, but I'm just snugged up against my spacers. By snug, I mean I'm tight. It's not going anywhere. You can set my tensioners. Up front, it pulls the chain straight with it. However, it opened up a gap here. So, it looks to me that if I put one of these in here, it'll take care of that gap when everything's tight and in line where it needs to be. Kind of frustrating, but part of the process, guys. If this is too wide, then I do have some bushings. There we go. I'm much happier with that. All right. I don't even have to really sit on this thing to tell you that that frame I was worried about, right up there, that's nowhere near being a problem. And our pivot, guys, we're just barely touching that thing, right? As soon as I push any pressure, do you see that? You see how the chain moves away from the pivot? I'm just pushing on that with one hand. When my considerable bulk is on there, that pivot comes about center of that chain. That's going to work, guys. We got a roller. You see how if I'm leaning on the bike, you can see the chain here, and the pivot is like over here somewhere. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about, buddy. Now that this is coming together, it's almost time to take a look at our motor. But before we visit the Save a 196 Foundation, we're going to get some handlebars and some brakes on this thing. Because as always, it's a work in progress. Have a good night, guys. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you on the next one.